Started.
Yes, I think we're all set up and ready to go.
Yep, recording started, and I'll mute my mic so that I don't have to transcribe the clattering of cutlery in the background.
Okay, welcome everybody. Put the people are still signing in, but we put the link to our main resource in the text chat, which as well as the registration form at the top there, has this panel that talks about the project and the fact that we're running these topics again under the banner of Reflected. There's a panel there about us, the main host, but then the most important thing of the day is each of our guest speakers, and today we've got 4 guest speakers. So we're going to proceed quite quickly. We're going to skip some of the things that we normally do at the very beginning and get started straight away. So I'm going to, if anybody does have any technical issues, you can, as long as you open the text chat, you can post a message in the text chat, either directly to me or for everybody to see, and we'll try and resolve that. So I'm going to stop my sharing, and not sure which of our hosts are going to introduce our first speaker.
I have that honour, and I'm really, really delighted that Alistair, I have 2 wonderful Alistairs at least in my collection of contacts. One writes haikus when he's wandering through Bristol, and it really cheers up my day when I'm looking on Twitter. Alistair Creelman, who's going to talk to us today, is a Scot who fled Dundee to settle in Sweden and Finland. And on the links you've got in the chat here, you've got a link to his blog, and I regularly tune in to his blog because his expertise and his insights are really worth following. I met Alistair through the Eurocall organisation, which I think he's been involved in for some time. And he also invited me once to do a session on open education. As you know, I'm very much into open practice. And I really welcomed that collegiality that he showed. So I know he's a fabulous person. I know he's got lots of expertise. So I'm really looking forward to hearing from him today on collaboration.
Thank you, Teresa. Hi, everybody from Southeast Sweden, from the city of Kalmar. It's actually a public holiday in Sweden today, so I'm at leisure, but you would not know it with a beautiful view of our campus in the background. The joys of virtual backgrounds. You can pretend you are somewhere you're not. Anyway, here we go. It's I changed the title in the presentation that you'll find in your resources is not quite the same as this, but I have now changed it to suit the talk. Multi-layered collaboration in an open online course. And I'm going to be talking about a course called Open Networked Learning. And this is a course that has quite a long history. It's a massive collaboration work between a lot of universities, which the course itself is built on collaboration between the learners. There are multi-layered collaborations in it, and it's possibly the most collaborative thing I've ever been involved in. It is actually the most collaborative thing I've ever been involved in, and one of the most complex courses. It's maybe not a model for everyone, but I'm going to share some experiences and some, hopefully some tips. And time gallops along, so I will get going straight away. There is the link. I will put the link up in the chat later. Open Network Learning is a collaboration. We started it in 2014, and we've been doing it 2 times a year since then. It is an open online course about open network learning, aimed at teachers mostly. There are between 12 and 15 institutions from 6 countries. Next time around, I think will be 7 because Poland will be joining us. It's about, yeah, there you see open collaborative learning in small groups supported by facilitators, learning by doing. The inspiration for this course came from a previous course, which, you know, there's a history behind this as well, but I don't have time to go into that. It's based on problem-based learning in an online environment. And the interesting thing is very, very few of us involved in this course have ever met physically. It is all online from the very beginning. It's multicultural and cross-disciplinary, and it's part of teachers' professional development. So we're aiming at mostly university teachers. Sometimes we get teachers from schools or from adult education, vocational training, but it's teachers. And it's about learning to teach in an open networked setting. Here's a quick overview of what it's about. For each course, we have a community of a number of institutions. These are the ones that were involved in the iteration of the course that has just finished. Mostly Swedish, but we also have Finland, Switzerland, Germany, Singapore, and South Africa. There are others who come in and then leave and come back. So we have several other institutions involved. So all of these provide participants to the course, but we also allow in a limited number of open learners who could be you next time round if you want. It's a limited number. We don't make a lot of publicity, but people find out about it and they enroll as open learners. It's free, but you don't get any credits. You get a nice little certificate and you learn a lot. So we have participants from all of these institutions. Those are put together in PBL groups of 8 participants per group, as far as possible. Each group is provided with, some of the little bits have not turned up here, but each group should have a facilitator. And it's not a teacher. The facilitator is simply there to get the group going, to be responsible for, in a way, the group interaction, to keep them on the right track and to cheer them on and provide support. We also have in every group a co-facilitator, and the co-facilitators are previous participants who come back for more. Believe it or not, we have no problem in recruiting these people. They come back and they don't get paid, they just enjoy doing it again. And they're there to be a study buddy for the group. They can say, yes, I know it's difficult at the moment, but here's how we solve this problem, or maybe you could think about this. So each of these groups, facilitator, co-facilitator, and they work their way through the course. And the course consists, I won't go into detail of this really, but we have 2 weeks of getting started and connecting. That's very important for getting the groups involved and to get a group dynamic. Then we work through topics. And during the topics, we provide webinars and tweet chats to support them. And they operate in 3 levels. The whole community together, interacting and sharing resources. The PBL groups working collaboratively on their own with their facilitators. And the personal space, which is their blogs, where they do their reflection. So each of the participants is working on 3 levels throughout the course. We have a lot of support. This has been built up over the course because we've seen the need for it. And because we have so many institutions involved, we have a lot of people who are involved in the course in some way. And every one of the sort of course team is part of smaller teams supporting the different activities. Some are the facilitator teams. Some are more support people. We have a little group who comment on all the blog posts. We have a group to look after alumni. We have a group that prepares the topics. We have a group that facilitates for the open learners. And then behind that, we have also the collaboration between the different institutions, the institutional coordinators, yes, I think you're probably confused by now, but what you see is we've built up an ecosystem of support for the course. Some of the issues quickly. Group work can be a problem. Even with experienced teachers, it's amazing how they're not very good at group work. In our groups, we provide the facilitator and the co-facilitator. They have a scenario to investigate, and they have synchronous and asynchronous work. A couple of video meetings a week, plus the asynchronous work, which is where the real action happens. And they present a learning resource related to each topic scenario at the end of the topic, plus the blog reflections. Now, some of the issues that we deal with are the difference between cooperation and collaboration. Instinctively, people cooperate. That's quite easy. You do this, you do that, and I'll do the other bit. They'll put it all together and we'll present it, and that'll be the work for the topic. That's cooperation. But slowly, as we go through the course, we try to get them to see that there's another level. Let's have collaboration instead. Instead of each individuals doing their own work and then we throw it all together, let's be involved in all parts. Let's create together. And that is the collaboration. And that requires group rules, rules of engagement, which we work a lot on at the beginning. How do we share the workloads? How do we take responsibilities? How do we respond to each other? We spend time, as I said, 2 weeks in the beginning, creating a community of trust with ice breaking and social activities. I think all of you do this anyway, but it's worth repeating. The facilitation is to provide space for them to develop. Facilitators take quite a major role at the beginning to initiate things, but then let go. And towards the end of the course, I sit in the background and smile and comment by chat rather than upfront by speaking. I let them run the show. Silence is important, even in synchronous meetings. There are many ways to explain why people may be silent in online teaching. Do we give time for people to think before they speak? Can we use silence positively? And this is something we've been thinking about quite a lot on the course. We have all of these factors, I'm sure, on every course. I'm not giving you silent time just now, I must admit, but here's some thoughts. Give everyone a voice, but a choice of media. Some people are not comfortable singing and dancing and speaking and being active. Maybe they'll make a contribution in writing later. Maybe they'll add a voice comment later. And recognize different types of participation. Reflection, analysis, and observing are as important as discussion and production. As an aside, you might want to look at this guide from a project I was involved in a few years ago about silent learners. And I use silence as a thought to end here by, for example, instead of recording the meetings, get them to share notes. Get them to work collaboratively to make notes on the session. That seems obvious, but it's amazing how we record things all the time. Just tell them we're not recording this and help them to make notes. Give them silent meeting time. Comment on a shared document. I've had incredibly active sessions where nobody says a word. We switch off the camera, we switch off the microphone, and we're all on a Google document, and you should see the cursor flying around. Amazing. When you ask a question, give reflection time. Even in a recording, you can, if you're recording something in advance, ask a question, say, right, stop this, write down some ideas on paper and restart this recording when you're finished. There are many ways, but think of silence as something positive and see if you can use it. And I realize I've come to the end, I think, of my time. These are my digital footprints if you are interested in looking. I will stop there, realizing that I've only scratched the surface, but there's more to come from my colleagues.
Excellent, thank you very much, and well done keeping to the time there. And I'll pass over to Lillian, I think, who's going to introduce our next speaker.
Yes, and next up we have Smriti from who's reporting on her work from Hong Kong. So Smriti, if you'd like to tell people a little bit more about your role.
Sure, I'll just share my screen as well, just to make sure that it's all set. So I am an educator here in Hong Kong for the last 13 years. I've been teaching in international schools, and currently I stopped doing that, and I've been a PhD student, a distance PhD student at the University of York, looking at citizen science in education. But actually what I'm going to share is something that was a side project that for some reason I thought I had time for in the midst of my PhD. And I think we just make time for things that we are interested in doing. So I just wanted to share a little bit about a project where I saw a call for just climate change education and activism research. And I thought, okay, that's interesting. It's not something that's necessarily been done before in Hong Kong or with the Hong Kong audience. So I thought maybe I'll dive into that. And so I wanted to share a little bit about this approach, which is participatory action research with students. And oftentimes in teacher PDs, I hear about the what, about a cool innovation, and then the why, but I'm not going to be talking about the what and the why. I, in fact, probably don't know enough about the what and the why, but I can certainly tell you about the how and the so what that happened in our experience. So participatory action research is a very collaborative approach between researchers and participants, and it usually is around some kind of question that one wants to investigate, which often has some implications for change in the community. And so my thought was quite simple. I should say at the outset, I did not know what I was doing. I'd never done participatory action research before. In fact, I didn't even know the term. So I just thought, let me see if I can find a bunch of students and teachers in my network who might be interested in exploring this little piece of research about climate change education and activism in Hong Kong. And we'll work together to, figure out some research questions and what our approach is going to be. Then we'll just do the research, analyze the data, super simple, and then write a paper, try to submit it to that special issue, and hope for the best. So I managed to gather a team of 18 people, and it comprised of 12 secondary school students, 3 teachers, 2 university students, 1 who was in Columbia University in New York. So we were also working across time zones, so 12-hour time difference, and me. But 0%, none of us had ever done participatory research before or published a peer-reviewed paper with students. So none of us knew what we were doing. But that was fine, because we decided that we were just going to play to our strengths, our collective strengths, and the availability. And I'll come back to that in a little bit. We also decided that we were going to be keen to just follow also the student voice and go down this uncharted territory. So about how we did it, we decided our key tenets were making sure that we kept a very flat structure and had equal weight to all the participants. And we also needed to be really well organized, despite not knowing exactly what we were doing, but at least we could be organized about it. And we tried to use every collaborative tool under the sun to also deal with our time zone differences. And the fact that certain people like to use Zoom or email or Slack or WhatsApp, any which way, especially when you're working with teenagers. So we wanted to be very open to the kinds of communication tools they like to use. And one of the most important things was we made sure that there was always an opt-out option for every single stage. And that was for teachers as well as the students, so that people felt that they wanted to contribute in the way that they wanted to, and that there was no judgment given if they wanted to sit out a particular part of the process. So this is just a quick little diagram that shows the part of the process after we did some surveys and interviews. And the SRT, the student research team, you can see we're part of every part of this staged process to analyze the data. And what came after the analysis part was the writing. So it was really collaborative. We were always asking each other questions about how we thought things or how we perceived things that we were seeing in the data. And at the end, we decided to collaboratively write the paper. And lo and behold, we actually got published. We tried to manage expectations all along that this is not a guarantee. This is a peer-reviewed journal. So in School Science Review, they had that special issue, and they felt that what we had discovered was worthy of publication. So that was the cherry on top. But now coming to the so what did any of our participants get out of it? And although we haven't done any formal research or analysis of this just yet, but one of the teachers and I would like to do it. So we're probably going to spend next couple of months doing that and plowing through the reflections in a little bit more detail. But I wanted to share with you some snippets. So one student said, I chose to assist in the actual writing of the paper. I feel that this would be extremely valuable. This would be an extremely valuable experience, as it would prepare me for the style of writing that I may have to use in university. It would also look good on a university application. So you can see that the students are also thinking ahead and recognizing that this is quite a unique experience and that this might hold them in good stead for when they want to apply to university. That same student also mentioned this element of critical thinking. They said, after coding, we were placed in a Zoom in order to discuss our findings and come up with conclusions. This was an interesting Zoom, as we were able to look more deeply at our findings, and it made me think critically about the school system and the things that inhibit students from partaking in climate activism. Sharing the ideas with someone else and getting their ideas allowed me to reinforce my own ideas on the subject matter. So here they're also talking about the learning that's happening for them and how it's built in collaborative situations. Another student talked about their skill development. By creating an open space, I'm giving the opportunity to listen to the different opinions. We get to reflect on our own actions and our education and how it has built and led to our position now. I feel that this project has been very useful in allowing me to develop my skills in writing and organizing qualitative data. An example was the interview. I found it difficult to articulate some of my thoughts and ideas. I also found it difficult to prompt other students in a way that was unbiased just for them to clarify their opinions. I realized that these skills come with time and experience, and I feel like this project really paved the way or introduced me to the level of research at a higher education level. Now, these elements of difficulty the student identified, teachers also went through the exact same thing because this kind of research was quite different. Another student mentioned, there are a lot of different opinions on what exactly activism is, and I don't necessarily agree, but it shows how different people are approaching this issue based on their cultural background. Many interviewees are giving things that they do that are more ethical for the environment, and it's allowing me to reflect and be exposed to more things that I can do in my part. And this was an aspect that was quite prevalent because we had, I think, at least 8 different nationalities in our research team, and even more when it came to the larger pool of students and teachers that we had interviewed and surveyed. So this cultural aspect really came to the fore. And the same student then suggests writing the suggestions and implications portion of the paper was actually harder than I thought it would be. I think it's easy to understand what things you're doing wrong, what choices aren't ethical, and what you have to do to change, but not easy to actually implement this change. So there's certainly that realistic element about what it takes to, now that we know what we should be doing, how do we actually get there, especially in an educational setting. I wanted to pretty much close up with a teacher's reflection, which I thought was quite special given also the COVID time and the experiences that a lot of teachers probably have gone through. As a teacher, this experience rooted me, and during the pandemic, there were a few opportunities that actually did that. One thing that has become apparent to me is how vital these opportunities are for teachers. We can't underestimate the importance of student-teacher interactions on the creativity of teachers. It fuels our craft, and it's been drained from the profession over the last few years. So I found this to be quite a profound thought from the teacher, one of the teachers that was part of our group. So I just want to finish with this slide. I'd love to share more of the reflections, but in the interest of time and just to also summarize, I found that across the feelings that the teachers and students had in our team, they really centered around this idea of that co-created learning in such a collaborative session. And like actually Alistair had said, people hadn't met. None of us have actually met together. This was all done online thanks to COVID restrictions at the time here in Hong Kong. So we were relying on all these tools to be able to work collaboratively and digitally over, it was about a 2.5 month period. The reflections, of course, also talk about the variety of skills that were developed, but also something even greater, I think, could be the sense of purpose, whether it was for the students as well as for the teachers. So I just wanted to end there and say thank you very much.
Thank you. I loved some of those quotes, and I noticed from the text chat that many other people did as well. So if anybody has questions, do pop them in the text chat. And Lillian, I think, is going to introduce Rachel and Grace.
Yes, and Rachel Hope. I think I should take a picture next to you, Rachel, because then we'd be hope and joy. Oh wow, Christmas. Okay, so Rachel in biology and Grace. Grace was one of my interns, but she's also interned for the biology department. And so it was Grace who introduced me to Rachel in a sense, and they're going to talk about their collaborative approaches to working in biology.
Fantastic. Thanks very much, Lillian. I will just get my screen share up on there, and then I'll tell us a little bit about what we'll be looking into. Won't be a second. Okay. So let's just make sure. Okay. So can I just check that that's the right way around for you, Lillian, so you're not sort of necessarily seeing all my notes?
Need to change it again.
Oh, I need to change it. Oh, perfect. Thanks, Grace. Wonderful. Great. Yes, I'd forgotten which way around I had it before. So perfect. Thank you very much for that introduction, Lillian. So my name is Rachel. I'm one of the lecturers in the Department of Biology at York. Not based in Hong Kong, so we don't have the time difference today. So Grace and I are over in the UK, but it's really interesting to hear about that research you've been doing there, Smithy. That was fantastic. So we'll be talking a bit about tools and resources that we use in the department that we've used sort of pre-COVID, during lockdown periods and now post-lockdown. And Grace has really kindly agreed to give us her views from a student insight as well. So what we'll be talking about today is be thinking about kind of lessons and development, how we help students with collaborative learning in those different contexts, looking at those different time periods. And then I'll be sharing with you a couple of longer term initiatives that we have used in the department to help with student collaboration in terms of a game that we use for learning and also a journal that we've recently developed too. So prior to COVID, our teaching involved the use of things like polling technologies, things like Turning Point, or looking to involve students in answering questions out loud in lecture theatres, those kinds of contexts. At York, we're really lucky to have this fantastic flat open teaching space that you can see in the slide here on the left-hand side. And workshops are things that we have in those, and they're often interactive workshops where we're able to have more interactive teaching scenarios with students working on problem solving so activities dealing with things like clinical scenarios, imagining you're a doctor treating somebody, whether it's environmental challenges or looking at developing biotech initiatives. We have those kinds of problem solving activities there. And prior to COVID, some modules included the use of aspects such as things like Google Forms ahead of workshops to get people's views and students' ideas on questions, but this wasn't widespread. Now, students with use of Google Forms could maybe submit answers to questions prior to a workshop and then could build on those in the group, in a sort of small group like you can see on this table here, maybe 6 or 7 students, and work on those answers in a workshop, and then lecturers would discuss those answers that have come in. And we also use things like Google Sheets, as you can see on the right-hand slide here, with things like sort of reflection, real-time data input. So this just shows some reflections from some students about a bioscience technique process that we had where they learned a new technique over the course of the term and how they found it, how they could see that other students also found it's really challenging or really sort of, sort of invigorating, really exciting. So we use them in those kinds of contexts pre-COVID. With our shift to online learning, obviously with everyone having to do that, we look to deliver lectures as a series of short connected videos. So usually a lecture might be 3 or 4 15-minute videos, which we gave the students flexibility sort of as to when they could look at those, sort of, so it allowed things like in time zones or poor internet connection or sharing, resources, those kinds of things. We also timetabled those problem solving workshops that we had, and we looked to use those to build a sense of connection between students and staff, and also to allow students to still have those opportunities to do problem solving and to try exam style questions, those kinds of things, but also to feel socially connected. Now, the workshop format commonly involves something like an introductory talk, a recap on any relevant theory, and then students went into breakout rooms to work on problems before coming back as a class to discuss the answers to those. And we found quite mixed levels of interaction with those formats, because sometimes we found that students were very quiet and not wanting to talk, others were very comfortable with that. Now, we looked to try and accommodate those mixed levels of interactions around things that came up with students' thoughts and concerns and anxieties, so that students ahead of those workshops and future ones could sign up to be in a breakout room with people that they knew, so they felt more comfortable doing that. Or maybe that we had a silent breakout room, so maybe people with social anxieties or learning disabilities, where they didn't want to be talking to a wider group, but they still wanted to engage with the content, they could be in that room, for example. And we also tried to introduce opportunities to ask and answer questions via something called Mentimeter, which is an online anonymous polling software. And this meant that students didn't have to worry about sort of being identified as they might be when answering questions in things like the Zoom chat or when turning on the microphones. So we use Mentimeter in things like Q&A sessions where students could ask us questions, in more social relaxed settings, things like sort of pub type sort of biology quizzes on biology based topics that we might have. And we also use them to regularly assess student well-being. So we use these Mentimeter Q&As. We also use Google Forms to check in with students on a weekly basis to ask them what's going well with your teaching and actually what can we change and adapt. And that allowed us a much more rapid sort of feedback in terms of things that we were able to change, things that worked well, rather than the feedback that we'd usually get just once at the end of term. So post-lockdown, what we've tried to do is take the good bits and include them this year, as we've been able to shift to more in-person teaching. Now, we've looked to make more active use of the contact time that we have. There's still students learning and collaborating with each other and making those social connections and normalizing, oh, other people don't understand that, it's not just me. So we've looked to have some workshop preparation material online. You can see that on the kind of left-hand side of this slide, where we'd have on the VLE, on their sort of online resource base, we'd have an outline of the structure for the week saying, watch these couple of videos, read this article, answer a couple of these questions, and then come to the workshop. And then what would happen at the workshop, we might be going through, you can see at the bottom here, we've got this Padlet slide where students have been asked ahead of the workshop to design an experiment to test something. You might be going through those with the lecturer, or you might be looking at Mentimeter type questions, as we can see on the right-hand side, and they could be on sort of pin the tail on the donkey type things, where sort of find this point in the middle where this process happens, or where do you think this happens geographically on the globe, and some exam style questions as well. And you can see the Mentimeter feedback there, sort of where students can put open-ended answers. And what we'd look to do is we'd look to talk through those as lecturers there, and to sort of discuss the types of things that are coming up, notice problems that people are commonly having, and allow students to feedback to us anonymously and work on those questions as a group in those tables of 6 or so. So that's sort of just a kind of what we've done briefly overall, kind of pre and post lockdown. And Grace is just going to share a couple of her views there as to how she's found that kind of shift in our teaching over the last couple of years.
Yeah, thanks, Rachel. That was a really nice summary. Yeah, so pre-lockdown, I was in my second year studying biochemistry at York. And as Rachel said, it was a lot of big groups and then collaborative working within those big groups, but it was hit and miss depending on which group you got given, whether or not you'd be like having a good discussion. But what was really good is that we had a lot of purposeful small group working, and in those groups, it was much more relaxed because we met those students more often. So having a regular group to work with really helps with the collaborative side of things. And then in those sessions, we'd mostly always meet in person and have some kind of Google Docs things where everyone's working on the same thing together. But you'd always have to come on site to do stuff. So what's a good thing about COVID, if you could say that, is that we've now progressed there. If someone can't make it, we'll Zoom them in kind of thing. So it's a lot more flexible working, which is really useful because I don't actually live in York anymore. I live elsewhere. So having the option to do things online has been very, very helpful. And also post-COVID, there's been a lot more communication between the students and the department. And that's been really great. That's been really, really great because we can talk about what's going on with us and our voices being heard more post-COVID than pre-COVID. So I'm really happy, like as Rachel said, with the weekly drop-ins and the how are you doing kind of thing. That stuff, it helps you keep on studying. So it's really, really helpful for student mental health and stuff. And during COVID, I didn't have too many taught sessions because I was away doing other things, but the breakout rooms was something that I did experience coming back to uni this year. And that also, I prefer workshops in person because there's people's internet are not good and it's not so easy to discuss things very well online, I found, with students. But when you have in-person workshops and online lectures, then it helps you to really engage with the content that is being delivered. So yeah, no, I'll leave it there.
Great stuff. Thanks very much, Grace. And what we'll just round off with is a couple of longer term initiatives that we've had in the department where students have been collaborating both in developing these resources for students and to help with their learning. So over the last few years, the department's been involved in students working to develop resources for the students. And there's two initiatives on the slide here. So a card game called Catastrophic, which is to support learning in undergraduate biology, and also BioDual, which is a journal to showcase student work and support reflective learning. And Catastrophic is designed to help players make connections across small and large scales in biology, and it's designed to help stimulate discussion and engagement with a first year module. Now you can learn more about this at the website and have a go at playing it online and learn a bit more about a crowdfunder that they've got coming up next week with that. But prior to COVID, we didn't play that game an awful lot. We had a couple of set times throughout the year where we included it. And what we've done now is we include it in weekly workshops with students. It allows them more social connection, learn in more relaxed kind of setting with that context of the game. And we seem to be having more engagement with that now, which is good. And with BioDual, we aim to create a learning community that's providing resources to foster reflective learning and independent learning, and also showcase fantastic student work. So this is basically a journal where students submit their work. We provide examples of it with feedback from lecturers, breakdowns from student editors, sort of connections to the marking criteria to really help students understand kind of what's done well in this piece of work, how it can be improved, and so they can apply that to their own writing as well. And we've had students, and Grace was one of our students that was involved in the development of this, and we're having them on the editorial board sort of going forwards each year with the development of new sort of submissions of this. And what we'll do is sort of understand more about their sort of experiences on the publishing role side of things, and also understand more about how students can use this within their studies to improve their sort of academic writing, those kinds of things. So we've got those two initiatives in the department. Grace, if you want to just round off really quickly to let us know your thoughts about that, with your views on how you might see this being used as a student, but also in terms of your side from the publishing aspect, that'd be really great. Thanks.
Yeah, so I haven't had the pleasure of playing Catastrophic being a biochemist, but working on BioDual, I think it really helps you to stop and think of the piece of work as a consumer, so you can get into the head of who's going to mark it and evaluate what you're doing as though, is this an enjoyable piece of work to read, rather than just trying to hit the deadline. It lets you slow down and just examine what you're doing. So with all the essays and the lab reports that are on BioDual right now, and the more that will be added, you can have a nice, because I was thinking, it's like with uni, there's so many firsts. It's like your first essay, your first lab report. And if you don't have any examples of that, then it builds up so much anxiety, because you're like, I don't know if what I'm doing is even what I'm supposed to be doing. But with BioDual, you have that, so this is the kind of level that I'm trying to aim for. So having that as a resource for students to use is going to be very, very helpful when it goes online. Then yeah, I'll leave it there.
Absolutely, great stuff. So yeah, as Grace said, we're looking with this, to have pieces of work of all different grades, so students can learn as much from an annotated essay that's been given a 2-2 as opposed to one that's been given a first. So we're looking to make it really inclusive and welcoming for all students to feel that they can submit work to it, and also that they can learn from that as well. So we'll have those students being involved in future editions of it in terms of the publication and submitting their work. And in terms of Catastrophic, you can just see that on the slide there as well. An example of a game in action. So this is just really helping students to sort of cement their understanding of kind of how the bigger picture biology kind of connects to the smaller level interactions they have. And you can see more about that on the Catastrophic website that's just up on the slide there as well. Learn more. You can have a go at playing the game online, because we flipped to an online version during COVID as well. And if you've got any questions as well about BioDual, then do feel free to drop us an email. So I realise that was a very short introduction to lots of different things.
That's great. Thank you very much. Thank you, Rachel, and thank you, Grace, for that. And again, there's some comments in the text chat. You know, have a look through there and join in the discussion. And I think it's over to me now, with the great pleasure of welcoming Jenny Blake, who's taught me some new concepts about time travel being collaborative, as well as other concepts. So Jenny's got some quite sophisticated collaborative thinking that's gone on, and I'll leave her to tell you about it in an expert way.
Thank you for that introduction. I was feeling like I was going to have to warn everyone. So yeah, hopefully you all enjoyed me taking you on a slightly divergent path. I'm Jenny Blake. I'm the head of teaching and learning development at the University of Manchester Library. So I'm not in an academic context per se, although this is about a credit bearing module that the library delivers on their PG Cert in HE. So with no further time wasted on me, let's get to the talk. So I'm going to talk about our PG Cert in HE module. It's been running for about 6 years now. It has completely open content, as you'll see, and we focus on what we call choral explanations, which means that there's sort of a constant collaboration and collective work around the ideas in the module that builds iteratively from the very beginning, from responses to readings, all the way through to the assessment, which has responses to previous assessments, all the way through to the module itself, which uses those previous assessments as the bulk of the reading and the publication that the students work from. It has a very diverse group of participants. It is currently for staff at the University of Manchester. However, it has people from e-learning teams, the professional services, support staff, academics, library staff clearly, and cultural institutions. So the way the modules need to be built need to be inclusive of all of the experiences and expertise that you can find there, and also, in the library's opinion, be able to surface them openly. There's a huge emphasis on peer learning, and I'll talk about that. And then finally, we talk about time travel collaboration and unlocking it, especially given the way things have changed now, unlocking it from perhaps being restricted into a particular group, or having the output be an assessment, but then that doesn't go forward in any way. So the first thing I'd like to do is take you through some of the questions we ask ourselves when we were building this module and when we reflect on it every year when we're going to try and rebuild it. So we always ask ourselves what it means to collaborate. I think when we first started, we did what many people do, and we thought specifically about group work. We thought about that output that somehow had to be done by everyone in the group and balancing that. And we wrestled with all the regular questions. So, but we started thinking, well, is there a different way? Then we asked ourselves, when can collaboration occur? And I think this was sort of the breakthrough, because we decided that what we really wanted to do was allow for collaboration across time between successive modules. So then we asked ourselves how we could do that. So the methods and tools we decided to use in this case is a blogging platform called Medium, which is now very popular. When we started using it, it was a little bit less popular. And there are other tools, including one called Hypothesis for Annotation. And in terms of our new normal, at least with this module, when there was the shift to online, because everything we had was already online, we were quite easily able to shift the 3 that were typically sort of physically on campus meetings to online, and it wasn't too much of a burden on the staff. And it also has allowed us to continue working online and open up the publication even further as we go. And the pictures that I have on the page are, one is an example of one of the things that we annotate. So that's the Cape Town Open Education Declaration. You'll see a bigger one of that later. And then 2 of my 3 children who are collaborating, they were working on this, they had taken the same idea, but they were interpreting it different ways, and then they ended up putting it together. And the idea there is that we have to make sure that we give our participants or our students the freedom to kind of build collaboration in the way that works best for them with the content that they're interacting with. Right, so the module. It's called Open Knowledge in Higher Education. It lives on Medium. This is a picture of the front page, so you can see everything that it includes. We call it a living publication. So what happens is that each year the assessment criteria or the assessments ask participants to publish openly online one self-reflective piece, and then one piece that I'll get to later that sort of combines, iterates, and collaborates with something else that was already present. Those continue to live online and are available for future participants, for anyone who wants to follow us as an open auditor of the module, and for anyone who happens to come across it on Medium. So the whole thing is open, and the whole thing is meant to work as a holistic set of collaborative outputs. In terms of the assessment specifically, I wanted to give you an example. So first of all, we explicitly refer back to work that past participants have done via our reading lists. We don't give them particular blog posts to read, but we suggest topics that people have tagged and things like that, that current set of participants can explore. And we talk to them about, collaborating across time. The platform that we use allows for comments, so it allows for collaboration and teasing out of ideas via the actual blogging platform, and responses for as long as you have a Medium account. It also recognizes the worth of the past assessments and their potential for reuse. So one thing we wanted to do was have people take away this sense that the work you put into working with someone doesn't disappear when you're done with whatever that was. And I think a lot of times when we work with students and we ask them to work collaboratively, they put immense amounts of effort in and things sort of disappear. And they may never see the assessment again, they may never see their group members again, and it might feel like it was all for naught. So don't worry, I heard the bell. So I think one of the things that we wanted to make sure was that one of our intended outcomes was that you walk away feeling like the work you've put in will continue to live on after you obviously are done with this module. In order to facilitate that feeling, because it won't necessarily be comfortable for people to refer back to other participants' blog posts right away, we wanted to get people comfortable with the idea of reflecting on, not necessarily criticizing, but reflecting on, the written work they find or other ideas they might find. In order to do that, we set up a private Hypothesis channel. If you're familiar with Hypothesis, it's an open annotating sort of web app. You can also set up things so that only particular groups can see. That makes it easier to manage administratively, which is the only reason we did it. We didn't want to keep it secret. And it allows, though, for people to have a live conversation on a document that lives on beyond them. So again, what happens here is we have each group of participants come to documents, but they see what's happened before, and then they're responding to the responses and to the document. They're adding their own current understanding of an area, and it ends up being a massive sort of resource for everyone. All of this thought, it never disappears, and we keep collectively working on it and teasing it out together, even if we're not physically present. However, one of the things that I think is really important about this is the second point I have here. We actually invite past participants back. So in the first instance, we collaborate via the blog post. We work together to come up with new ideas using the ideas that we found before, and to create something new, by adding everything together. But secondly, we have past participants come back to lead and facilitate discussions, and then there is an option to work collaboratively with a past participant on your assessment. We also encourage the participants, if they're interested in doing so, to submit as a group. So if there's something that has been sparked and a pair of people, for example, want to collaborate on their assessment, we encourage and allow that. Our current materials, therefore, reflect the past participants' contributions. It pulls the current ones into this wider collective and collaborative space, and then it keeps that emotion going by adding to that year on year. And then finally, when we add the annotative and choral work, it builds the opportunity for collaboration down into the individual responses to the reading. It also does something which I think is very interesting metacognitively, which it kind of reveals the thought process people have while responding to something. So if we go back to the first presentation and we're thinking about cooperation versus collaboration, cooperation often sees you siloed, doesn't it? So you do your own thing in your own space, and then you sort of bolt it together. And that can work quite well. But you won't understand where someone came from or how they created it because you can't see the process in their head. But because we build this individual annotation process in, you effectively can see the thought processes someone might have had. Then you can watch them adding the thoughts others have had. And then you can look at the output finally in their own assessments. And you can trace that entire process along. And so when we're looking at it as educators, it's really interesting because you can see people really getting to grips quite quickly with, you know, an alternative assessment requirement, a blog post instead of what they might normally be used to, an open assessment requirement, although we do allow for anonymous submissions for various reasons. And it can really make things move much more quickly, and it can make it feel much more productive and powerful, I think. And then finally, we want to talk about collaboration as a mechanism for inclusivity. When you set up a module or a learning experience that values what came before, right, that demonstrates that value by asking people to refer back to it, by actively encouraging its sort of integration into what you do, then people can feel confident that what they bring to it, right, the work they put in, will be effectively worth their time beyond a mark, beyond the certification. So we assert that this longitudinal collaboration, the sort of time travel and ability to look back at what's happened before and build it into what you're doing now from a participant perspective, means that the model itself is more inclusive. And instead of it being dependent on the course conveners to demonstrate the multiplicity of perspectives, instead of us having to build artificially in some cases, you know, case studies that represent the breadth of experience that's available at the university, it's all present inside the module itself. So I've got a minute. So I want to thank some particular people. Anna Tice, if we go back, or if you look at these slides, it was her assessment I was using because she did such a good job referring back. So I wanted to thank her in particular. Jess Napinth Hodkinson right now is our lead course convener. She's also a past participant who also came back to deliver. So she was a participant, then a past participant, and now she leads on the course for us at the library. Chris Milson is the magician who has hacked Medium for us several times in the most positive sense and allowed us to do some things with it that you can't always do. And Craig Morley is the second lead on the module right now. If you're ever looking for someone who can't shut up about pedagogy and things like this, you can definitely always email me, and I'm all over Twitter. I have an actual problem, but I love talking about things like this and would be happy to fill in more. So that's me.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Jenny. And for that, it's lovely to end on a note of enthusiasm and you know, participation and invitation. So excellent. So we've had 4 really good presentations from 5 different people, and it's so different, the different aspects and elements. So there are things that have been going on in the chat behind. There are questions that you might now have. So I think I'm going to pass over to Ron and Teresa now, because Lillian and I might be kicked out of this dining room quite shortly. So Ron and Teresa, over to you.
Thank you, Alistair. And as you say, it was such a rich discussion and so many fabulous examples. I feel like I want to go and lie down in a darkened room now just to take it all in. So we have a couple of minutes for an open mic if you wish to ask questions to our presenters. You can raise your hand or pop questions in the chat. I will scan back. And guest speakers, just a quick request for you to switch your cameras back on just for the last few minutes. I've seen some of our presenters are addressing questions in the chat, so thank you very much for doing that. So I'm looking out for hands.
And we're not afraid of silence either. We've learned that
No,
today,
absolutely, absolutely. And but I know myself how difficult it is to do. I was in a webinar recently, just doing a webinar, an Open EdSig webinar, where we'd asked people to answer questions, and I asked for us to sort of wait in silence while people were doing that. It's so difficult. And thank you, Jenny, because I follow you on Twitter, and it's lovely to actually hear your voice and listen to you today. I'm not spotting any hands. I don't know, Ron, if you're spotting people with questions or hands up who want to take the mic.
Sorry, I was just putting some links in the text chat. And while we're waiting for those questions, I'll very quickly do the bit that we usually do right at the end, to remind people that our what next instructions, let me just move that out of the way. Share the link to these resources with your colleagues. Make sure you're on our mailing list. If you're not already, that's where we announce things, and including when the recording of this session will be available. Perhaps create a blog post and reflect on what we've covered today or what you do as an action, and share that via the mailing list. Register and join for our next webinar, and I've just put the link in the text chat, but it's in the main resource anyway. And more importantly, if you're inspired by the fantastic reflection and examples that our guest speakers have shared today, why not have a look at our guest speaker expression of interest form and see if there's a topic there that's coming up over the next year or two that you might want to be a guest speaker on, and share your experience of whatever that topic is. The next one is supporting reading. Alistair, Lillian, do you want to very quickly summarize what we've got planned for that one?
I think we've got a couple of external speakers lined up. Alistair and I also want to kind of share with you a free resource on the best file formats that can help students with their reading, something that we developed together. And in fact, Alistair's presenting an extended version of that, aren't you, Alistair, today at Blackboard Conference?
Format ninjas.
Format ninjas, love the term. But we still have capacity for anyone, especially if you can bring in the learner voice. Like we've had Grace, we've had Smriti today, talking from a student perspective about their involvement and participation. And I think that's the key thing about this webinar series this time, reflected, thinking about the impact of what we're doing. So if anyone can kind of contribute a student voice, we really, really welcome it.
And we're hoping, I'm waiting to hear back, but we're hoping to have a blind student come and talk about the things that make a big difference to her in terms of the effectiveness of her ability to read productively.
And I'm going to put in a quick plug for our open badges, because the Future Teacher Network now issues open badges to speakers. So all of our presenters who have spoken today, look out for your email and claim your open badge to share on your social networks or on your website, and help spread the word of this fabulous network.
Any specific questions just before we end? Were there any questions? I know Teresa and I were thinking about whether there'll be time for some of the big questions. So one of the big questions I had, and I may not be around long enough now to hear the answer, but particularly perhaps from Grace or Rachel, what's the way of coping with free riders? You know, if you've got a collaborative group and there's somebody that's just doing very, very little work and that's impacting on other people, are there issues with that? How do you manage that? And anybody that's got that experience.
I'd be really interested if sort of from Grace's perspective, first of all, because I think that's often one that we don't really hear as to how you actually manage those kinds of things in your groups.
Yeah, it really just depends on the people in the group. With anyone who's in my group, I don't tolerate the free riders, so I make clear from the get-go that everyone's going to contribute here. So having a person who is strong and wants to lead the group, such as myself, really helps with that. But also, I had one of my friends, she was in a group where people weren't really knowing what was going on, but they still managed to produce a good piece of work. So I think if you give it enough time and just let them talk to each other and let them understand that together you guys are here to produce a piece of work, then generally speaking, it tends to work out well. But it's just about time and really making sure people tend to try and click with one another.
Do you ever find situations where it doesn't work within a group because there's a clique within the group who are always communicating and there's a few outsiders? Or is that a function of the size of the group, and is it an optimum size for a group?
I
So
think-
any
Yeah, I think a group size between 4 and 5 tends to work well. If you really wanted to, 3 would also be well, but then you'd probably be stretching the amount of work that each individual would have to do. But I think as long as the group is never more than 5, like if you're trying to make a group of 6, 7, and 8, then you start to make 2 separate groups within the group, and then you start to go off in these separate cliques. So if you have a small group of 4 or 5, then people have to talk to one another because you don't really have enough people to form groups within groups. Yeah.
I think from our side of things, you know, we're always asking students to do get in touch at the first opportunity if they are sort of having issues with group dynamics, so we can get in touch there. And also we're very considerate that a lot of students have a lot of things going on, so maybe there's other things outside of their degree that we can help provide support with. You know, they might be having sort of personal issues, any number of things, so we always look to sort of, you know, get in touch and try and consider those kinds of things too.
That's excellent, thank you. Any other comments, Alistair or Smriti? Jenny? Or is it just, yes, I agree, which is perfectly good answer.
Yeah, just general enthusiasm. One of the things we get asked as a library a lot to support group work skills. And one of the things we always push back on, I don't think it's applicable to this group necessarily, is like, first look at your assessment. Like, are you forcing the students into a situation where one of them has to rewrite it all that night because it has to be perfect or something? And I love your cats. So
Very timely cat appearance.
yeah.
There's also the issue, I mean, there are people who are genuine introverts who, I mean, there are many people who find group work extremely disturbing. And somehow having to deal with them, they just want to do it themselves, and they find the group work just a complete, I don't have any perfect solution to that. We have tried giving some people more back, make them note takers, make them observers, make them getting them to summarize, because they're very good at that, but they just don't like the chit chat and the activity very much.
Yeah.
But I haven't heard a perfect solution to this, but some people just don't like it, and many people find it a waste of time. Collaborating with people I'll never meet again, when I could do this very effectively in half the time.
So we do have a method used by our law department where they start off group working with the students, looking at the Belbin roles and understanding their way of contributing and how that is going to impact the outputs. And that reflection in itself is quite a useful thing about teaching people to collaborate, depending on your own nature as well, that everybody plays a part. And even if you're a bit of a lone worker and you go away and write something and you bring that back to the group, as we've seen, it can impact other people's ways of thinking about something. So there's still a way of contributing, even if you tend to be a lone worker, maybe. So I'm going to stop the recording here, but not, let me just